Hello and welcome to House Einstein Podcast 53. I am your host, Osman with House Einstein, and with me is Hamish Crabb.
Hello, hello.
And today we're going to be talking about how different today's buyer is compared to buyers of only even a year ago or 2 years ago. The market has so dramatically shifted.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a notable shift in the behavior of buyers and also kind of the landscape as a whole, as it were. And I'm kind of excited to dive into it. The topic came up after a work dinner we had not too long ago, so be fun to discuss on the pod.
A very fun work dinner that we just had.
It was
Although
excellent.
I don't know if I'd call that a work dinner.
No, for
work
professionalism's
hangout.
sake. Yeah.
But before we get started, this podcast is coming to you from Boulder, Colorado, and is sponsored by the House Einstein Brokerage, but it is not the House Einstein Brokerage. It is entertainment for you as a listener. If you are a client of our brokerage listening to this podcast, then pick up the phone or email or send us a text message when you need real estate advice, because even though this might sound like real estate advice, it's not. Our attorneys tell us this is entertainment. So please keep that in mind and, of course, enjoy the show.
Perfect. And wonderfully done.
We're getting faster and faster at covering that. And we'll walk you through what today's topics are. And we're going to have a little bit shorter of a podcast today because of the necessity to attend a closing dinner. And that means we have a hard stop in just over an hour. So this will not be a 90-minute podcast. And our mission at House Einstein is to help you make a smarter decision. We've mentioned, if you're a client, to contact us directly. If you're not a client and thinking about being a client, you can visit us at houseeinstein.com. We will have a whole new website out in a couple of weeks. I'm super excited to hear your feedback. And today's topics are going to be a deeper discussion about how different today's buyer has become and things that sellers probably don't know if they're thinking the market is anything like it was a few years ago. We're going to touch base on market conditions, specifically focused on the city of Boulder and Boulder County using the most recent available data, that is July's data. And today is August 6th, if you're wondering when we're recording this, so not even a week. And the data that is in the MLS today is a little conservative, meaning that there might be a few straggling data points that get added in the next few days, but for the most part, it should be about accurate. We have our usual shameless self-promotion where we'll be talking about one of our new listings that's hitting the market that we are super excited about. And we're going to touch base on 4 sales of the week. We're going to talk a little bit about what's in the news, and then we'll wrap it up.
Sounds like a good podcast. Should we get into it?
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's an entertaining podcast. Yeah, let's get into it, Hamish. You're the one
so.
that suggested today's topic du jour.
Yeah, well, for the past few podcasts, we've talked about market conditions and the kind of the saturation of buyers under contract versus inventory available. And, there's kind of, you can always speculate on what we think we're going to see in the market and then what actually happens. And I think we're starting to see what's actually happening. And with that is this kind of new type of buyer archetype. And I'm not going to slant a good or bad on it. It's kind of just the way things are. But this is a type of buyer that isn't pressured by the possibility of losing the house that they wanted. They're not necessarily caught up in maybe this house won't be around by the time we get back home from these showings that we're on. And so you start to see a little bit more confidence in their offers. They'll have a few more contingencies, or they're just more willing to walk away altogether. Recently we had a buyer who was put off just by a certain negotiation point in the contract that really wasn't related to the property at all. Awesome.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's the tee up for me. I'm a little bit older than Hamish, and
no,
what pops in my head is a song that was very popular in the 80s when I was in elementary school, and it was a song called "We're Not Gonna Take It" by Twisted Sister. And I feel like that song really epitomizes how buyers are feeling about today's market. And it applies more to the mid-range and upper end of the market where there's a lot more inventory than at the entry level where there's still scarcity of supply. But
Yeah.
Mr. Market is not static. And as supply grows and demand drops, the market behavior of buyers and sellers shifts. And there's a noticeable lag. And some of that lag is caused by momentum that agents create with artificial scarcity tactics. They are still trying to drive the bus with yesterday's news about the market. And so some buyers are still afraid of losing the house by being too aggressive on negotiation. And other buyers have gotten the message. They have lots of choices. In fact, when I'm taking my clients around Boulder, in Boulder County, it's not uncommon that we have a full day of showings. And only a couple of years ago, we were lucky to have one showing on a weekend. And now we can fit 12 showings in easily for most of our clients that might work as they get to learn the market and see what their budget buys them. And so what does that result? When you have 12 options in a weekend, they can easily walk, and their cost to walk is very low. So sellers face, once you're under contract, the leverage in the deal shifts. And it shifts from sell side to buy side. In the beginning, it's sell side, and it has been heavily sell side the last few years, where sellers can demand terms in the inspection contingencies. Sellers can drive up the price in a bidding war, and all of that buyers basically had no choice but to put up with. But now buyers don't have to do that. And how should buyers and sellers think about that? How should sellers think about the reality that buyers have a lot of choices? Many are willing to exit a contract because they don't have upfront costs. And meanwhile, buyers are a little worried prices could fall further. And the deal leverage has shifted enough that buyers don't typically have to give up contingencies to get a property under contract, meaning that they don't have to dial back their inspection necessarily. Now, if it's a brand new listing on the market and it's a home that's turnkey, updated, and relatively rare in supply, those still are out there, then buyers probably want to think about dialing back some of their contingencies a little bit. You don't necessarily have to, but if you do, your offer will likely be taken more seriously. And there could be another buyer who's interested at the same time. We're actually seeing that right now on one of our listings that's delayed the recording of this podcast. It's not even a new listing. But suddenly both buyers realize that in this particular price point for this particular type of property, this is a fantastic home. And both sides have been hem-hawing for like 3 weeks. We've been cultivating two sets of buyers, and guess what? They're both interested now. One wrote an offer, and the other is scrambling to potentially write an offer themselves because they realized they waited too long. So there's all sorts of interesting buyer and seller behavior happening, and I think that the right approach for a buyer is to be patient, take your time making sure it's the right property, but don't be so cautious that you lose out on a deal, because the real attractive homes you're still going to potentially lose out on if you drag your feet too long before making an offer. And for sellers, and this is what most people don't know, so this is the part that gets our namesake for this segment, and this is the reality, that signaling is so critically important when you are communicating to the other side. So we recently had a deal, and this deal did fall apart, and in the deal, the offered commission was was significantly below our contractual commission to the brokerage from the buyer. And as is the norm, the sell side pays commissions out of their net proceeds. However, it's the buyer funding the deal. The buyer's always paying commissions, by the way, right? The house wouldn't sell if the buyer wasn't paying the commission through the sale price of the home. But this particular seller initially, so this was during a time period that the MLS still had the commission amounts. So listed it below what's normal for our market. Not massively normal, but not massively below what's normal, but a few points, a
little discount, points,
right? From what would have been considered the norm. So we'll just use numbers, okay? So the norm in our local market is 2.5 to 2.8. In Boulder, in Fort Collins, it's closer to 3. In Denver, it's closer to 2.5. In the mountains, it's more typically 3. And this particular seller listed at 2.3.
So not far off.
well, not far off, but
Yeah.
we have an agreement with our buyer that they're paying 2.8. And we wrote that into the contract because the seller pays commissions, and it was a full price. Actually, it was more than a full price offer, because my buyer didn't want to lose out on the property. And so, unbelievably, the listing agent called me and said, my seller doesn't want to pay 2.8. I'm having a hard time getting them to 2.5. Would you accept that? And I explained to them that we do all of these extra services for 2.8. We have laid out all of those services, and our buyer has already agreed to pay 2.8. So I'm not renegotiating what I'm getting paid with the seller. And
Right.
you can go ahead and counter at 2.5 or whatever, but I want you to think about what that signals to my client, the buyer.
Right.
Before you put this in writing, and hopefully explain to your seller so they understand that this is not a smart idea. And we kind of walked through it, and she said, I agree with you 100%. I'll do my best. And then when the counter showed up, unbelievably, to an offer that was over list, they put in 2.5. And so now I, as the buyer's agent, have to go to my client and tell them, okay, guess what? You got your offer pretty much accepted with one major problem, and that's what you get to pay me. They only want to pay me 2.5. You've already agreed to 2.8. So at closing, you're going to have to cough up 0.3%, which in this case is $4,000 additional cost at closing. And they wanted the house, so they agreed to it. But internally, that felt awful. Okay? I'm sure that felt awful for them. It doesn't strengthen my relationship with my client.
Yeah, it was mentioned.
And now instead of negotiating on the house, we're negotiating on what the buyer's agent's getting paid in addition to the house. And so this is so incredibly short-sighted for such a small amount of money. Long story short, the deal did fall apart. There were inspection issues, all of which were concerning. And because of how the commission negotiation was handled,
the very
it
first
contributed.
Communication, right, between both sides.
The very first,
first impression.
100%, they realized that, we have these serious issues with the house. We don't think the seller is going to be negotiable on any of them, right? If they weren't going to pay $4,000 after getting a full price offer, more than full price offer, they weren't going to pay the $4,000 difference. They're not going to deal with all of these other issues that are real, legitimate issues with the property that far exceed that number. Let's just get out. Let's just terminate.
Yeah.
And so we did. And we did so before we went and looked at other houses. I want to add that to the discussion because I did bring this up with my client. I said, we can't really look at other houses seriously because that's potentially bad faith. And my client readily agreed. They said, absolutely, terminate. Let's get out. Let's go look at other houses. We don't feel good about this house anymore. And so the reason this is so important is that, first, buyers have the right to terminate unless you somehow have given up that right. Two, signaling really matters with real estate transactions because it's not about the $4,000. It's about the emotions in underlying the purchase experience. And like it or not, you can believe me or not, but emotions are the most critical component of any real estate transaction. And if people have a bad feeling, they terminate. And if people have an amazing good feeling, they feel more generous and they're less likely to object over trivial issues. So in addition to pricing it right, you really need to be careful with how you conduct yourself in verbally and in writing, what you're signaling to the other side, what you're negotiating on, particularly in the beginning. And ask yourself, is it worth it? As we start to dive into this world of buyer and seller negotiating the buyer's agent commission in the contract process, I mean, my advice to our clients is if it's in the ballpark of what has been the norm, and I just told you what the norms are, don't counter on the buyer's agent commission. Like if they want 2.8 and you thought you were offering 2.5, just pay the 2.8 and take it off the top, because if you don't, you are creating a conflict between the agent and their client, which is not what you should be doing, is interjecting that conflict in your negotiator's relationship, your counterparty negotiator's relationship with their principal. It's so obvious and basic, but yet people that think they're experts in negotiation but have not practiced as negotiators and don't think about emotions, right? Like they're very smart people. Like this seller was a very, very smart person, very well educated, very professional job, but clearly was so short-sighted when it came to emotions. And in interviewing my client later, it was this issue in the beginning of the deal that was the cherry on top or whatever that pushed
set the tone, right? Yeah.
It set the tone. It was a contributing factor. And it was only $4,000 on a deal north of $1 million, right? So trivial amount of money for a deal this big. Yet that's where the deal got hung up in the beginning, and that's what was a contributing factor. I'm not saying it was the issue. The issue was significant inspection problems, but also a belief that the seller was never going to actually be reasonable about these serious issues.
Well, yeah, and coming back around to it, now the buyer, today's buyer, right, is empowered to kind of be like, you know what? I know there's other homes. I got an icky feeling from this, on the onset. I'm out. And that's what we're seeing now. So it's
I've said it for years. There's always another house, but it hasn't been this true since 2008 or 2009. And I went back through and looked at my data on listing inventory, and I'll share these charts with you afterward, Hamish, so you can see what the city of Boulder and Longmont and Broomfield and all of our local markets had for inventory during the bubbly behavior of 2005, 2006, 2007, when we saw a huge upswell in inventory. We're not quite at that number yet, but we're starting to get close. And this means a lot of selection for buyers, and the leverage in the deal has shifted. The leverage in the marketplace has shifted. Not at all price points, not at all locations. And what you as a seller need to do is be really careful, much more careful. Like, the market is far less forgiving. It is full of stories.
It's not your market anymore, right?
Yeah, it's not your... We'll talk about 4 listings that closed in that segment, 4 recent sales, notable sales that's coming up. I think all of them had serious price reductions before they closed. None of them were like gangbuster, full price, gotta have it.
One of them's like a significant discount.
One of them is not. It is a multi-million-dollar discount. It went from a shockingly. It sold for less than half of what it originally was.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk about that one, and also with some cautiousness there, because we don't name and shame people in any way, shape, or form. And this person is actually, the seller is somebody that contributes a lot to our community up here. So I don't think it's their fault, but the market is what it is, and their
kind
approach
of that
to pricing was
too. Yeah.
Well, we'll talk about luxury pricing and when it makes sense to intentionally overprice it as a signal, and whether that strategy is an intelligent one or not. It certainly is a strategy.
So it's something.
So
alrighty.
I'll just reiterate one more time.
Yeah.
Just so that it's really clear. Be incredibly careful with what you broadcast to the other side, and think about the emotional impact of what you're saying to your counterparty. And if your negotiating counterparty is really good, they will filter for you at a high level. If they're not very good at negotiators, they will say exactly what you said, even if it was rude and obnoxious and insulting. They'll share exactly what you said to their client. And so if you know they're a skilled negotiator, you have some room for things like sarcasm and snark, and incredulity. Comedy sometimes, like I just had with one of my favorite agents to negotiate with, literally right before this podcast, and I can't go into details because that's an active deal, but yeah, be careful with what you broadcast and think about the emotional impact to the other side in what you're choosing to negotiate on and how you're choosing to negotiate. And the game has changed dramatically from just even 6 months ago, but for sure 2 years ago, radically different.
Perfect. And that's a snippet too. So if you listen to the podcast, check out our Instagram and stuff as well. We take little cuts and cuts of the podcast and put it on our Instagram as well. But on to the next topic. Where are we at? Market conditions.
Market conditions, Hamish. So right before we jumped onto the podcast, I did pull up what is happening in the market, because July's data has been released. And if you've already heard this previous segment, you've already gotten a little bit of a teaser, and you know that inventory is up. But let's talk about the actual numbers. So we're going to focus on the city of Boulder, but again, we cover Denver, we cover Fort Collins, we cover all of the cities in between. We also head up into the mountains and do resort property deals. In fact, my accountant messaged me asking me why our dues and subscriptions are so insanely high.
Really?
And he asked me he asked me to, like, what are these I need to know the individual why these bills occurred for you. Oh. And all of them were MLS related. All of them were association and MLS related. Thousands of dollars to be on all these MLSs. I think maybe we should talk about dialing it back because I don't do a ton of deals up there, but I need access to the data to advise clients. So I don't know any other way to do
it's
it
a
without
conundrum.
being part of the MLS.
Yeah.
And that's also, by the way, a question you should always ask your agent is what MLSs are they on? And if their answer is they're not on the MLS that serves
That's insane.
the market that you want to be in, that you're trying to buy in, do not work with that agent. They are not in that market.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about Boulder County first. And we're just going to focus on detached single-family houses because I got to wrap up this podcast. We cannot have a super long podcast.
Maybe we'll do a data dive special episode or something. Not today, though.
Maybe we will.
Yeah.
I used to put out literally like 36 or 48 charts every month on all of our local cities with all of this data. But now it just makes more sense for me to reserve that level of analysis for specific clients and then tease the rest of you with some high-level data and commentary rather than go that granular for the entire market. It's like 3 days of data crunching to give everyone what they want. But if you're out there and you're listening, and if you want more data, and you're not under some contractual agreement to work with somebody else, and you're open to working with us, I'm more than happy to go as deep down
give us a call.
The data rabbit hole as you would like to go. So, new listings, Boulder County detached single-family houses. There were 381 new listings on the market last month, and that is a very slight increase of 3.8%. Total inventory available to purchase, 857 houses in Boulder County. And Boulder County, for those listening and are not familiar with our local market, the city of Boulder is within Boulder County. So this data is inclusive of the city of Boulder, also Longmont, also Lyons, Lafayette, Louisville, all of those are in Boulder County. But all of those markets have their own nuance. So if you are looking at data that's relevant to you, you can't rely on county level data. You have to dial it. You have to dive in. Okay, so that's homes for sale, up 34.5%. Property under contract, up 2.3%. 266 listings were under contract. So that's 2.3%.
A little
increase.
Something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Still a relatively small percentage, right? If you do 266 as a percentage of homes for sale, 857, 266 out of 8, what did I say, 57?
Yeah, 857.
857. Oh, where'd my calculator go? There we go. 31% of the market's under contract.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty
small margin
market.
Yeah.
More than 2/3 of inventory is available at all price points. And then closings. Last month there were 271 closings, down 8.4% from the year before. And all of this data was from the year before, by the way. We're not talking month over month, we're talking year over year. And sale prices. So the median sale for a single family house was $890,000, up 6%. And on a dollar per square foot basis, it actually dropped to only $348, which is well below construction costs these days. At least, let me back up. Especially for custom homes. It may not be true for large-scale developments. So 348, that's down 1.4%. All right, so that's Boulder County. Let's do the city of Boulder. We'll do the quick rundown on city data for July 2024. New listings. There were 112 new listings that hit the market, down 3.4% from a year ago. Keep in mind, sometimes those new listings include refreshed listings. Sometimes that happens. It's very difficult to tease that out of the data, but it's typically a very small number. So a few of those are probably refreshed. And then homes for sale. Overall inventory 342 single-family houses on the market in the city of Boulder. That's an increase of 37% from a year ago.
Wow.
And only 62 of those homes were under contract. That is a plunge of 16.2% compared to a year ago. And under contract, 62 as a percentage of homes for sale, which is 342. So only 18% of listings in the city of Boulder are under contract at this moment. Closed sales, there were 79 that closed last month.
Yeah.
That is a massive decrease of almost 20%, 19.4% below last year. And the market clearly peaked. It peaked in May. And May had 92 sales, by the way, and that's compared to 98 a year ago. And then in June, the peak of 2022, the peak was 109. And then when you back up the clock all the way to 2021, we were seeing a peak of over 150, 154. So during the heady days of 2020 and 2021, the peak sales month was more than double. Oh, no, sorry. 90 is not more than double. 154 compared to 92.
Okay.
So roughly 150 over 92. So roughly 63% is the difference there. 63% more homes were selling during the peak months. And then sale price. The median sale price in the city of Boulder was $1.4 million. That's an increase of 9.6%. And when you think about that on a dollar per square basis, it's up 5.8%, or 584 a square foot. And just keep in mind that we've got a sample size thing going on. With relatively small samples, you see higher volatility. But over the course of many months, you still see a trend, and that trend is still upward. Very clearly upward for for City of Boulder. Well, it's a very scarce resource.
And that's, all right. We were when we were putting together show notes, we saw that and we were like, no way, it's still up, considering kind of 18% under contract saturation. But then we zoomed out to Boulder County, right, and it did it shows the larger picture because of that sample size.
It is a conundrum, right? Because if you're sitting on the sidelines going, how is this happening? How are prices still rising, but inventory is up 30% from a year ago? Because inventory is not up so much that we've seen massive price decreases on a statistical level. But on an individual level, we have seen tons of price reductions. So the market is correcting downward, but you're not seeing it in the median sale price. You're seeing it in the expectation of sellers coming back to reality, because there may have been a sale in the comps that was, let's say hypothetically, $2 million 2 years ago, that was the identical house, but now it's not going to sell for maybe it's a 1.8, not a 2 million, but it washes out statistically. So statistically, we're still seeing dollar per square moving up. We're still seeing the median sale price moving up. It's not moving up as quickly, and likely there's going to be quite a few deals on the market in the fall. It's a very interesting, I think, statistical artifact that prices can still move up even as supply has moved up and sales have fallen down.
Yeah, it's kind of, it feels counterintuitive to see it, right? And it's actually kind of cool. Thank you for explaining it, because I didn't know kind of why it wasn't reflected quite yet in the data, or what would take the change, but it looks like just a little bit more.
It's washing out with a large number, right? Like, you may not see it on individual houses, or you may. And for sure, when we look at these sales of the week, we're seeing, for the most part, a lot of price reductions that eventually led to a sale. So before we go to sales of the week, let's jump into talking about our new listing.
Yeah,
and we could finally mention the address.
Yes. It's me? Okay. Let me get this time code down. Well, 1380 Knox Drive. It's a Lower Table Mesa. Is that correct?
I don't think the people that live in that neighborhood would feel very good about you calling it Lower Table Mesa.
Bottom Table Mesa. No.
It's definitely not Bottom Table Mesa. It is Table Mesa.
Yeah.
So, yeah, people do call Upper Table Mesa, but I don't think I've ever heard anybody call it Lower Table Mesa.
It's just got that negative connotation to it.
I don't
just lower.
So there is well, you're bringing up a very interesting point, and that is as you move up the hillside, in general, as you move up Table Mesa,
Yep.
as you move up this neighborhood in elevation and get closer to the open space, the lots start to get bigger in Devil's Thumb. You'll see bigger lots in Deer Valley and Stony Hill, and you start to get views, and you start to get homes that abut the open space, and for sure, that's considered a premium location. However, that's not necessarily indicative in all cases because, for example, our new listing at 1380 Knox Drive has jaw-dropping views of the Flatirons across the park.
Mm-hmm.
So right in front of this home is city-owned property. We need to verify it's city-owned. Hamish, it might be county, but I'm about 90% sure it's city-owned. It's municipally owned. Mm. And there's a disc golf course. Yeah. There's parks. There's the rec center. And then there's an incredible view that you have of the Flatirons. And these owners who I represented on the purchase of this home years ago, they have invested so much pride and love and financial resources, thought, care. I guess pride was the wrong word. They're investing. They earned that. They have pride, and they should have pride in what they built because it was not built as a spec home. It's not a flip. Which, if you've been in this business long enough, you can pick out a flip the moment you walk in the door. Mm-hmm. There are just so many signs. It's very rare that a flip or speculatively built property will dot the I's and cross the T's in such a way that it expresses quality. And it shows up in things like finishes. Like I think we've talked about this before. Like this home was not built, the one I'm in right now was not built as a flip. Mm-hmm. And there are all sorts of things somebody who was trying to maximize profitability would not do, including all of this solid wood trim. Instead, they would use the cheap fiberboard trim because most buyers are not discerning on the quality of the trim, the fit and finish of the finish quality of the overall finishes of the home, the attention to detail, the craftsmanship, the choices of windows and doors. All of those things become really obvious when you've seen enough homes. And this particular home on Knox Drive, none of it was done with profit in mind. It was all done from the perspective of building a dream home for the owners. Right. And they are ready to move on. They've had some shifts in what they want in life, and they're planning to do some more travel and adventures. And so it's time to sell this incredible property.
And they've had great years in it, too. You know, they've lived long enough. Yeah. Yeah, they've been
raised a family in this home. I don't know if lived long enough, occupied, not lived, but occupied the home long enough. And the home is, we're very honored to have been chosen as their listing agents. And we're super excited to bring it to market. And I think this home is a really smart buy because that your capital investment is more protected from downside risk because of the views.
Yeah, I don't want to say protected views, right? But they're
there's no such thing as 100%. There's no such thing as 100% protected view because the city could change something. You don't know forever. There's no such thing, including in city and county-owned open space. I used to think that was forever protected, but given how politics has shifted, I don't think it's forever protected anymore. I mean, the city of Boulder is suing the FAA, for God's sakes, to try to shut down, the airport. But the views, right now you're fronting the park, and you are on relatively flat ground, very close proximity to the schools. And these schools are the best schools in Boulder County, and these schools rank nationally in their performance. They are rock solid schools. Public schools, and you are also in close proximity to the shopping areas in Table Mesa, and you're not on a steep hillside where your kids have to climb up Mount Everest every day to go to school, right? Like they can ride a normal bicycle and be at their elementary school or their middle school or their high school in minutes. Yeah. And it's not an ordeal to go up and down. You're a little further from the open space. You're a little further from the open space trails on the western side of the neighborhood.
That's what I was going to get at. It's like, you've heard us say Table Mesa a bunch, but if you're unfamiliar, it's a neighborhood in the southwestern part of Boulder, and it's still, I think, it kind of gives off that, like, kind of idyllic neighborhood feel. It's like huge trees, lots of shade, and then there's always kids like bicycling, or, families walking around, or projects going. It's like a lively kind of established neighborhood. And if you do want to know kind of more specifically on the Table Mesa area, we do have that YouTube video. I think it's like 7 things you should know about Table Mesa. I just wanted to give some context because we're talking about Table Mesa like it's super familiar, but yeah, it's a pretty neat spot in Boulder. Yeah.
Oh, that's a really good point. We don't know who's listening.
I just kind of was like,
I will say, thank you for explaining where this neighborhood is. And we talk about this on that video, but there's an interesting historical precedent in Boulder where North Boulder trades at a premium. And the reasons for that are mostly historic, but frankly no longer make any sense. And that's why South Boulder feels like a really amazing deal. We don't know where we're pricing this home yet, but I can tell you the equivalent house in Newlands, which is a neighborhood in North Boulder, would be probably about 3.5. And we sold one of those houses,
I think probably around 5,
2 years ago.
Yeah, 2
years. So that house that I'm thinking about and you're thinking about, this home blows it away. I mean, I love that house, but this home blows it away. And so South Boulder is a fantastic deal when you look at the whole of Boulder. It trades at a discount. A good rule of thumb is about 10% difference between Table Mesa and, say, Newlands. Mm-hmm. And maybe even a little steeper than that if you're on the western side of Newlands.
Newlands is such an interesting animal. It's just, it's a little mind-boggling at times.
I love Newlands, but the lots are smaller. Most of them face east-west, and you are closer to the North Boulder cycling routes. Mm-hmm. You are closer to Mount Sanitas, but Sanitas is also overrun with tourists.
Yeah.
And you don't see that in the South Boulder trails. And the shopping plaza that is in South Boulder is so family-friendly between Whole Foods and Southern Sun and Under the Sun and now Illegal Pete's.
Yeah.
And Sweet Cow and Southside Walnut. Like, you have everything. Oh, and also the King's Soup. You have 2 grocery stores, a tire shop, a cake shop. You can get your tattoos done there. Like, that shopping plaza has it all. It's got everything you really need. And once you live in South Boulder and you live in Table Mesa, you will find you probably aren't going downtown very often. And sometimes we have to drag our clients that are relocating here to this conclusion when they're like, wait a minute, why is South Boulder so much cheaper? And we have to talk to them about the historical reason why it's cheaper. It was developed later, and Newlands has these streets that face the Flatirons, and it has historical momentum as being where you might want to live if you are affluent in Boulder, but it doesn't necessarily provide more value in terms of the house and the community and all the things you want, except for the cycling route thing is real. You are closer to the North Boulder cycling routes.
I'm going to make a note for this to become a larger topic because I want to keep going, but for time we're going to have to scoot along.
All right, Hamish, I appreciate you keeping us on time. Let's jump from shameless self-promotion to our sales of the week. And I need to open up this cart. Good thing I save it as a cart, Hamish.
Yeah, that was a good move.
I put these in the cart from my laptop, and now we are on the tread desk. All right, let's move on. First one. Oh, wait, are we doing this in price order? Hold on.
No,
you chose.
I've got them on the show notes here. If you want to just follow that.
Yeah, we'll go with your order. 1838 Mariposa Avenue. Yeah. So Mariposa Avenue. This particular location is just east of Chautauqua, and it's in very close proximity to what used to be a pretty decent shopping plaza on the east side, and then Whole Foods moved all the way out to Table Mesa. So that shopping plaza is a little bit struggling. The Taj is there, but it's a really cool neighborhood. Yeah. It is a neighborhood that has a mix of historic homes as well as newer properties, and there are all these little social trails that enter into the open space around Chautauqua and kind of curve through the cemetery or around the cemetery on the south side. So I really like this neighborhood. I think it's a really choice spot. And Chautauqua is your centerpiece. And if you need to get to Denver or to the airport, it's really easy. From this neighborhood, it's much faster than, say, North Boulder.
Straight through Baseline.
And this particular... Yeah, so you just hop on Baseline. Exactly. And so this particular property was originally listed at 3.4 in May. And after about a month, they dropped it to 3.075. So they took more than 300,000 or more than 10% off the price. And it eventually went under contract about 10 days after that price cut. And it closed for 3 million flat. So a pretty significant discount from original list. And a time period on market of about 70 days. But the reason this makes the cut for notable sales is it's a really nicely sized 5,000 square foot home, finished 5,000 square feet too, with a full 6 bedrooms and 6 bathrooms and a 2-car garage on a larger than typical lot at 10,288 square feet. Yeah. And when you look at the house, this is a home that is understated on the outside. Like, it looks like it's very subtle and very modest on the outside. And then on the inside, they've done some really pretty updates to make it pop, make it livable, make it current. But none of it is so modern that it will age quickly. And I don't know about the black walls in the bathroom. That's a little interesting. But the choices of fixtures and finishes are all fantastic. And it does have flat iron views. You can actually see Kohler Mesa is what you're looking at through the bedroom window.
Kohler table.
And Kohler Mesa, yeah, is that. I think the bedroom staging's a little unusual. I don't know if that's staging. That's probably the seller's possessions. The kids' room with the 2 beds
with their little
and the
frames.
house frames.
Yeah,
the frames are. I've never seen that. And there's a 3rd little house. In that photo, it's such an interesting photo that it tells me it's probably not professionally staged. But overall, a really nice house, and so there's a scarcity of family-friendly, larger homes that are not over the top, and this home is definitely not over the top. It's generously sized for the market, and well played. So I think the owner got themselves a really good property, and I really like the location. I've always liked Mariposa as a street. You won't see a lot of cross traffic. You might get a little bit, but you won't see a ton. So, and you're only a couple blocks from the social trails into the South Boulder open space and around Chautauqua.
Yeah.
So nice choice.
And my quick honorable mention before we move on is this house is kind of located diagonally in its lot instead of perpendicular, and I kind of enjoy that use of the lot. So many houses are kind of facing direct perpendicular to the street. This is at an angle. It's just a nice look, a little shake up from the norm. Yeah.
That's cool. I mean, I like the little photo of showing that. I don't know why they included the font in the description. I should also note that not all the beds and baths are in the main house. There's a carriage house, like a studio. So that's part of the count. And that really works well for a lot of people to have studio space rather than having it all under the same roof. So, what's interesting, and I didn't read this to you before, Hamish, is that in the broker remarks, there's some language in there around whether the ADU conversion is legit or not. And I'll just basically say, this is the sentence that you would have. This is so typical of Boulder, but here's the sentence. Buyer must conduct their own research and due diligence with the city of Boulder regarding any future remodeling plans and or use.
Well, yeah.
And please be advised that some images included in marketing material may have been digitally enhanced. Oh boy.
Well, yeah, it's marketed as a detached studio, and I bet there's some reasons to that. That's all we wrote on that one, I think.
Cool. And during COVID, they paused all work on the ADU. There might be some asbestos. Okay, none of that should stop you, by the way. But it does mean that you should go in with eyes wide open, and that is something we believe firmly with all of our buyers, that, look, there's no house that doesn't have compromises, that doesn't have issues. The important thing is to understand them and ask yourself, is that a deal killer? And in this particular case, it clearly wasn't. It closed for $3 million. So, moving on.
Worked for him. All right, this one's contemporary and unique and just very pleasing on the eyes, but a total departure from tradition. It's 1740 Cedar Ave in Boulder.
1740 Cedar Ave,
Yeah.
just north of Balsam. So as you take Edgewood west, Edgewood turns into Balsam, and then you hang a right, and there you are on Cedar. So it's an interesting little pocket of a neighborhood. Shouldn't see a lot of traffic. It is North Boulder, and the subdivision technically is Silver Maple, but nobody calls it that. They just call it North Boulder.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, I'm sure that Google Maps will name it something else. But it is a really interesting home. It was built in 2008. It is contemporary. They chose some, I would never have done this, like the weathered wood finishes, especially given fire risk. I would never have gone that route particularly, but okay, that's easy enough to swap out if you don't like it. There's so much flat work that's interesting in this home. The choice of concrete flooring.
That's flat work?
Well, flat work is usually considered outside.
Okay.
Not inside, but this is inside concrete flooring. I don't know what else to call it. Concrete floors. You see the trusses in the basement that's supporting all that weight. And because it was built in 2008, it's all very current and new, and it looks seriously over-engineered. The design was by Todd Reed and Ava Meyer with an architect, Corey Nielsen. So Todd Reed's a jewelry designer who's well known here in Boulder. So I'm not exactly sure how they collaborated or what was involved, but it is LEED Platinum certified, so that speaks very highly of its energy efficiency. Yep, absolutely. And the house listed in May at 2.8, and within a week was under contract, but for some reason that buyer bailed out. Who knows why they bailed out? It was not disclosed. And let me double check to make sure it was not disclosed. Yep, not disclosed. Why they bailed. So pro tip, if you are thinking about buying a home that had previously been under contract, there's nothing stopping you from asking for the notice of termination as part of your due diligence docs to figure out why did this deal terminate. Because you may or may not get a straight answer from the listing agent. They're required to tell you about any material defects in the property. But if they don't know what they are, what's there to disclose? So long story short, you can do more due diligence on why deals fell apart. So this one fell apart and went back to active status and then went under contract again. And that deal... Hold on, let me make sure I'm reading this right, because it looks like it happened twice, and I'm starting to get bleary eyes.
Yeah, I'm on Realtor.com. I'm not
10th,
getting any of this.
Yeah, sorry. May 11th, it went under contract. It went from active to backup. Active backup, so went under contract. And then May 28th, it was back on market. So 2 weeks later, it terminated. That's typically during the inspection period. And then it went back to under contract July 25th, and it sold on August 2nd for 2.63. So not a bad deal, 2.63 on this house. And I think if you look at the design of this home, if you're into contemporary homes, modern homes, this one really was spectacular.
You know, some of the angles or finishes, maybe I think it could be the concrete with the steel with the wood, but it gives me, I'm reminded of our old listing 340 South Peak a little bit.
Yeah.
There's some touches that are similar.
Like that.
Yeah. It's kind of neat.
So the thing about such hard surfaces is they echo like crazy.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it is a nice 4-bedroom, 5-bath, but you probably are going to want to throw down some rugs because you're going to hear echoes everywhere. What did I say? The sound children make? You're going to hear that.
The sound created by children.
Reverberating in your head. Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, we were
property.
saying it's going to be quiet floor to floor, but echo throughout, right? Because it is so, as far as we can tell, solidly constructed.
Yeah. And also a house with a separate studio that, in this case, was leased out. So that bedroom and bath count includes the additional studio space.
Yeah.
So cool house. I'm a little jealous of it.
Yeah, me too.
I'm more of a traditional home buyer.
Yeah.
Okay.
A trad buyer.
Well, look, we will represent you no matter what kind of house you want and what kind of house you're selling. But if you want to talk about personal preferences, I just have a thing for traditional homes.
Yeah.
But let's talk about another modern, contemporary masterpiece, the one I've actually been inside, and that is 987 Lost Angel. So 987 Lost Angel hit the market in July of 2023, so over a year ago. And this home features about 4,000 square feet, 4 bedrooms, 4 baths, giant 5-car garage, 24 acres of land. It's off of Sugarloaf. And
how far off?
It's I mean,
like a couple minutes up.
It's like if you're on Sugarloaf, from the city of Boulder,
from Sugarloaf,
you're probably about 20 minutes.
Like the turnoff, you know.
If you're driving from this house to downtown Boulder, you're gonna do it in 20 minutes or less, maybe 15.
Okay.
It's not that far.
Yeah.
So it was originally listed at $6 million, and nothing happened. And they cut the price at the end of a month later to 5.5. Nothing happened. They withdrew it, and then brought it back at a shockingly low 2.25. So if you read the listing description, they decided to auction the house. And I don't know why they decided to auction the house. Auction sales are super rare. They are not a thing.
This was an auction.
So they hired a company to conduct an auction. And the original listing agent still involved. Apparently, I don't know the backstory of the deal, but they chose to auction it off, and it sold for 2.4. So it sold for $150,000 above the last list price. But to get the auction going, they intentionally priced it low at 2.25. And I think that might have even been a bid that existed during the auction price. They decided to reprice it to try to get more interest in the home. And it appears to have worked, and they did sell it for 2.4. But it's just such a shocking reduction from what the seller originally thought it was worth at 6.
Yeah.
So when you walk into this home, it feels like a ship. Like there are certain design elements that are nautical in nature. But it is a home that just is so beautifully designed to frame all of these views in the meadow. You'll see one photo in it. The photo of I think it's a bathroom or a sauna. I think it's a bathroom. And it has a ship hatch door, which you see that theme throughout. And I thought when I've been in this home, I thought it was so interesting and unique. I did not go into the studio when I was there. It was occupied. I didn't go into the horse barn either. But it was such a neat and interesting property and in such a cool location. And frankly, sold for such a shockingly low number. I don't think their timing was right on the sale, unfortunately. And the approach of price it to the heavens and hope is what they went with. And I think it really damaged the eventual sale price. But then they just had to sell it. And they decided that auction was the way to go. You only auction a home when you really have got to sell it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just sort of floored that they decided to approach it that way. And they only got 2.4 for a home that should have been well over 3, in my opinion, if not even a little higher. But mountain homes with fire risk. Is that thunder, Hamish?
Yeah. It's been going.
Mountain homes with increasing fire risk and the awareness of that are getting a little harder to sell. They take longer. That's what we're telling our clients that are selling mountain homes. I don't recommend the auction approach unless you absolutely have no choice but to literally fire sale it.
Yeah, it's so unusual.
Because the previous owner was well known in the community, had lots of parties for the community at this home. It's a well-known house, and it's really unfortunate that it sold for so little. And so if you're thinking about auctions, you may want to just price it right to begin with rather than end up a year later dumping it in an auction.
The route from extremely high price to extremely low auction, there's got to be a bigger story there. That's just such an unusual route to take, and I want to know more. But
I don't know the situation of the seller, but it's the kind of thing you would see if somebody has to liquidate assets to pay off
then
the
and
claim.
there.
They are in a lawsuit, they're in a divorce settlement. There's something going on that is this house has got to go.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how we're going to get it done, because we tried for a year with the traditional listing approach. Now, there is something to be said for pricing it high. especially in the luxury market. It sets a signal. Once upon a time, in fact, this listing description says it. We were priced at $5.5 million at one point. Well, you were priced at $6 million at one point.
Yeah, I guess.
But it's like this
put that anchor
mentality.
in.
Yeah, the Gucci handbag that was $2,000 is now $1,000. Well, that's supposed to make you feel better spending $1,000. Like, I personally think you're better off to price it intelligently and not shoot the moon, but with a greater potential for price reductions at the high end. That is something that is common. I think a lot of agents just tell people what they want to hear when it comes to pricing, and unfortunately, it results in this kind of behavior. But if you're going to price it high, have a conversation about what happens in 2 weeks if we aren't getting the showings. And be realistic with your listing agent about your sale timeline. Like, if you really need to sell it in 3 months, forget about the price at high strategy. Yeah. It's not likely to find success. And if you do want to try it, be ready for a really fast price reduction. Okay, let's keep going, because we got to wrap up. I got to roll in 15 minutes.
Super speedy.
For a closing dinner.
Super speedy. I appreciate that the barn is a similar style and design to the main house. There's an additional kind of garage space, and next to that almost looks like what I imagine an elevator to a bunker would look like, but I think it's a tiny little ADU. Okay. Further adieu. Now we're moving into...
It's such a cool house. Yeah. Hamish, in person, I really, I was at a party at the house. It's so cool. And I think somebody got themselves quite the deal by paying attention to an auction on this listing.
Okie dokie. The next one's traditional. Oz, your fave.
Yeah, we're going to rip through this one. So we're mostly talking about this one because it is good to hold in comparison with our new listing at 1380 Knox. And this listing is 3,400 square feet. The address is 1137 Barberry, and it's a 5-bedroom, 4-bath with a 2-car attached garage built in the 80s on a 6,500 square foot lot. And it's in Devil's Thumb, and it's a location that you're paying a premium for. Some of the Devil's Thumb homes are in better locations than others. Some of them are backing to open space. There's actually some community-owned open space too that helps create a sense of separation from your neighbors. All of that's case by case on an analysis. You should really do that carefully. But this particular house has some nice updates, but it was remodeled in what I consider kind of a superficial way. Like, they didn't raise the ceiling heights. They just redid bathrooms, they redid baths, they redid the kitchen. But the ceiling heights are the same. The layout is probably pretty similar.
The layout looks
pretty
much standard, yeah.
Standard. They didn't do anything with the exterior finish. It's got what looks like beadboard and a rough stone front entryway that is very much dates the home.
What I would say is like it's almost you're looking at like remodel versus updates. Like updates kind of bring the pre-existing thing to modern standards or to the latest, but a remodel kind of rejigs the entire footprint, right?
People want big windows. People want like rooms that flow into each other. They want to be able to open the front door and see all the way through the house to the outside. They want to see
some of that
really large and spacious outdoor entertaining areas. It's a nice house. Don't get me wrong, but it is very much what I would. Well, it is one to keep in mind when you see ours show up that has been soup to nuts redone, not just from a finish perspective, but from a design and layout perspective to feature views. It will help establish price point for potential buyers. So anyway, the deal was this listing hit the market on July 11th, and it was under contract in 2 days.
Wow.
And I think it was underpriced, but it did sell for a slight discount. It sold for $20,000 below list. Probably minor negotiation there. It was a cash deal, and the buyer symbolically paid a small amount below list. But from a function perspective, 4 bedrooms on the upper, 1 in the basement, modest square footage, Devil's Thumb location. And it is Barberry is a little lollipop off of Wildwood, and it is on the west side, meaning that in theory there's open space really close by, but you're not actually backing to open space. in order to access it, you have to hop on the Wildwood Road and walk to the trailhead. And you're also going by the energy transfer station, the electric utility.
I was going to say, I thought,
transfer station.
It looks like there's kind of an unofficial social trail that goes through this empty lot, 1205 Wildwood. Do you see that?
Yeah, I doubt that that's a legit social trail. I guess I'd have to go stand there to see.
An unofficial, a locals trail. I don't know what the...
But the thing to really know about this spot in Devil's Thumb, it's a very unique aspect, is this electrical substation is a visual blight and creates potential risk of EMF exposure. That's something for you to decide if that worries you. But that has an impact on some of these homes. This one is not impacted by that, but you certainly are going to walk by it as you go to the legit trail entrance. And of course, it's really nice to be in such close proximity to the trails, but you're also way up on the hill compared to Knox. And so you're further from the things that you're going to use every day, and it's less bike friendly. You're more car dependent because of that hill to get up there. Point. So that's just something to reflect on, something that most people would not know or maybe even think about if they lived until they live in the neighborhood and they realize that Devil's Thumb is a more affluent location, but it also comes actually with some downsides in terms of livability on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Good point. I'm making notes, right? Ian from the team, we're going to be putting together a video for Devil's Thumb. And I have a page of notes, from earlier today. And you're bringing up, bigger lots. And I'm like, I'm going to make a note for that, So that's really handy.
I sold a home in Devil's Thumb maybe 12 years ago. And then 2 years later, they were unhappy. And the reason they were unhappy was that they had kids and none of their neighbors had kids.
No way.
And their kids' friends were all lower down on Table Mesa, and they really felt like
isolated,
they felt isolated, and they felt like their friends, the kids' parents, were kind of they kind of looked at them as like there was like a social class status thing. Not in a good way, in a bad way.
Out of favor to them,
by being in Devil's Thumb and having school-aged children. So
I grew up.
So what? And if you know the neighbors, if you go and this is, you got to be careful with these topics because we don't want to create a fair housing issue. But if you look at the neighborhood demographics up there, it is 100% older than further down the hill where you have more families with younger children, school-aged children living there, fewer retirees.
I 100% can see that happening. There was a little bit, my grandparents bought in a neighborhood in Broomfield right when the development first started, when it was absurdly cheap. But since then, that neighborhood's done pretty well and is still kind of regarded as like a higher end neighborhood. And when I was in high school, kind of, first weekend, fresh off the boat from New Zealand, I was like telling people that I lived in that neighborhood, and they'd all be like, "Ooh, fancy," and I was like, "Oh, I had no idea," and there was a little bit of air to that.
Exactly, that's what I'm talking about. And then your kids are gonna feel this, social ostracism or some teasing about living in the affluent neighborhood, and it may not be a plus. Maybe it's what you want, and that's fine too. But at least you should know about it.
So we got to move.
We have 4 minutes. Last topic.
Speedy news coverage.
Okay. In the news, well, anybody listening to this has already experienced the roller coaster of the stock market that began last week. And the spike in the VIX. The VIX is the fear gauge for Wall Street. I don't pay much attention to this stuff anymore because I'm no longer a securities analyst. I lived that life for a very brief period in my professional career where I got to track stocks and work on financial analysis.
Best years of your life.
Research. So, no.
I know,
the best years of my life have been the last decade. They were not the best years, but they were formative. They were formative from an analytical perspective, from building those skills. And the VIX was something we used to pay some attention to. And boy, the VIX spiked. That's Wall Street's fear index. It's an index based on option prices. And so... the stock market plunged, and so here's where it's relevant, right? Because this is not a financial analysis or investment analysis podcast. Where it's relevant for our listeners is that the higher end of the market is very sensitive to movements in the stock market because those buyers are in the stock market, right? A lot of their wealth and affluence is invested in the public markets. So they're going to feel it
5% swing
more
could
than
be rather, it's huge.
But it may accelerate the Fed's timeline for cutting interest rates. And in fact, there was some discussion of emergency rate cuts. And when the Fed cuts the discount rate, there's not an immediate reaction with respect to mortgage rates. But over time, mortgage rates tend to track very closely with the 10-year Treasury. And so that drops, so will mortgage rates eventually. It takes a little bit, but it is likely the signal that mortgage rates will start to trend downward again. So right now is this Goldilocks market with a lot of selection at almost every price point, but particularly at the higher end. And it's an opportunity to move cash out of a stock market that may be overbought and may have more room to go down. And if you feel your stomach churn when you see the S&P move 3% in a day, you may want to think about moving into something a little less volatile and something you can live in called real estate. And that's a lot of our buyers that are affluent. They're paying cash for homes. And that's also for the buyers that are thinking about getting a mortgage and thinking about buying the house. You date the rate, you marry the house, and the rates, when they drop, you can refinance into a better rate and into a lower mortgage payment in the future. Don't do anything risky. Strongly advised to talk to your financial advisor before you make a decision. But that is a strategy that a lot of people have employed. And right now you have more selection than you would normally. Yeah. So enjoy it while you got it.
Succinct. Exactly with the point we were trying to hit. Well done, Oz. And that brings us in.
And that is...
Oh, you go for it.
The House Einstein podcast for today, August 6th. And if you enjoyed this podcast, if it added value to you, please like and subscribe. You can also check out our YouTube channels. We are on socials. You will see us on Facebook and Instagram. Most of our higher quality content finds its way to YouTube. And traditionally we have a newsletter, but I haven't published it in a couple of months because clients always come first. And that's how we roll at House Einstein. If you'd like to learn more, visit us at houseeinstein.com. And thank you so much for joining us today on the House Einstein podcast.
Hey, take care. Have a great week.